How's it going, YouTube? Coming to today with another video, and today, guys, the video is going to be the NAWCQ meta tier list. Now, this is so important because this is the biggest tournament of the year. This is what decides who goes to Worlds, and that's major. And I really wanted to see everyone do as well as possible, but this is the year where if you don't know what something does and get caught lacking, you're gonna go X3 drop quick. And that's because there's a lot of different decks that can do a lot of things right now. And if you don't study up and you play against one of them, especially if you go second, it's going to be a rough ride. So you want to make sure that you're as caught up as possible. You're going to see where I put every deck here, and I'm going to give you explanations as to why, and I hope that you take that into your deck choice consideration for the NAWCQ. So the first one here is Punk. I think this is going to be top of tier 2, a very strong tier 2. I think that Punk is really solid right now. The field spell is a very crazy card, and the amount of extenders the deck has is also pretty wild. I think a lot of the new support really did really well for the deck. And that also still has Psychic and Punisher, which is a house. So you want to make sure that you are as prepared as possible in this event. So if you are going to be playing on something like Punk, make sure that you go back to my word of hand trap, you go ahead and test against it, test the deck out itself. Make sure that you know what this deck does, because if you do pair into it, you're going to want a game plan. The other one that you're really going to want a game plan for is going to be Vanquish Soul. Now, I'm not going to overrate this deck. I do think that the deck is very strong, and that's why it's in 1.5. I think that 1 to 2 people are going to top the event with it, which is cool. I think the deck has needed some help for a long time. It's going to get a lot more help with the K9 cards, but will this deck be able to go the extra mile? I don't know, because I don't feel like this deck is going to be the best at going second. Yes, the deck does play quite a few non-engine that can help with that, but the engine itself is not strong enough to go second, so that does worry me for the deck. Going first, the deck can do pretty well, right? And if it's going second and you draw Holy Sue, it's going to be really good. But the other thing, though, is that if you're not opting to steal a monster and you're playing against Vanquish Soul, and then they summon the Holy Sue on your turn, and you have Impulse or Ash when they go to summon Rosin, you kind of just FDK the deck, because they're trying to summon out Rosin, which Rosin will also reveal Fire Dark, and then pop a card. They'll search the Caesar, tag out the Holy Sue, then they'll also pop another card. So it has a very good strategy right now, but I don't know if this is going to end up being the deck to win it all. I do think that you're going to see it, for sure. You should know what this deck does. It's going to top, but it's not going to be one of the best decks in the room. This next one's going to be so silly, but Morganite Stun and Rogue, this is just the next Runic Stun. And you should make sure that you know that that's just another thing in the room. And the likelihood you play against this is pretty low, but it's going to be in the room. Someone's going to be playing it. It's Morganite Stun. They're going to be summoning things like Vanity's Ruler, Vanity's Fiend, and you might get FTK'd by it, right? So make sure that you at least semi-understand what this does, because in the off chance that you run into it rounds 1 to 3, it's going to be a rough go if you don't know what it does, right? So make sure that you look into it, but it's not going to be a meta threat in the room, but it will be something that you will end up running into, or at least seeing somewhere in the room. The next one being Malice here. I really do like Malice's format more than ever right now for this event. I think that this deck actually just like tears up Lunalight, and that's another big concern in the room, because you have Cyber's Wicked. And Wicked just says whatever it points to can't be killed by card effects, and Wicked also can't be killed by card effects or battle. So it gives you a really optimal line to get into Goddess. It gives you a protection point for things like Cryptor, for things like Access Code, so you can really contest the Liger as much as possible, which is something else that I find very key in deck building right now for this event, because you'll see what I think about Lunalight after this. But Malice, I think, is one of the decks right now that just has such a good time dealing with towers at the moment, especially just because it's a link deck and you have access to things like Goddess, which is something that every deck wishes they had access to, but realistically they don't. And, you know, Malice is still one of those decks that has the craziest first turn board. So if they're going first and they're able to put up full board, it's going to be really hard to break it if you didn't have a hand trap. So make sure that you are prepared for Malice. I know on my side right now, I'm pretty sure I have 3 Lancia and 3 Chaos Hunter, just because this is like the one deck in the room that I'm like really afraid of, right? And I want to make sure that I'm as prepared as possible. So make sure that you are also as prepared as possible. The next one, though, being Lunalight. this is unironically up here with Malice right now. This deck, very scary. If you play against this deck, it's like SP Baguska double Liger or SP Baguska Liger and then like a hand trap, right? So it is pretty intense to play against, and you really gotta know your choke points in this one. Bell is really fire into this matchup. Having a Lancia or a Droll is really vital into this matchup. A Bestial into this matchup. There's a lot of things that you want to make sure that you are just on when it comes to versing Lunalight, because the deck back in 2019 was already really scary because it had cards like Azathoth behind it to make sure that it was really going forward. And now we're not really going to compare Azathoth to like Liger Dancer, but if you don't have an outlet for a Towers that's also quick effect Regeki, kind of feels like it, you know? So make sure that you have a game plan for Lunalight. It is a very strong deck right now, and it's something that you will end up seeing in the room at some point in time. Tempai Ruler, I'm not really going to say a whole lot about this, but it is tier 2. You will run into this. It has a lot of results at regionals right now, so it's something that you could see. This deck itself loses to Droll and Lancia both pretty hard, so make sure that you have those cards. Also, Bell is a really good option for the main deck right now, and that also does a good amount of work against his deck too. So especially if your opponent's trying to like kill you with Tempai cards and then you Bell Biden, it's just like really awkward. So just something to keep in mind, but I do not think that that deck is going to be like that strong. I think Punk is even just better than that. But the deck is going to be in the room for sure. The next one that's going to be in the room is going to be Fire King, and it's going to be somewhere next to the Tempai deck. I think that is just tier 2. You'll run into this deck here and there, but like it can play really well when the pilot is really good with the deck. If you're playing against someone who like doesn't really understand the deck, then it's a little bit easier. But the deck can run Impulse. It can run a lot of non-engine, and it can really play around a lot of the different crazy hand traps in the game right now. And with a lot of people switching to Bestials, this is just like a purely fire deck. So that's something else that is really going for the deck too, where you kind of just dodge some of the meta trends right now, which can give you an edge in a lot of matchups currently. Now, I foresee Branded having a pretty tough time right now, and I'm going to put it at tier 2. Again, I talked about this in my last video where I was talking about like the meta differences into what's going on right now. And I think that, again, we're going to see a lot more Rock and a lot more Bestials. And with Bestials being really prevalent in the room, it's going to be really hard to try and play Branded because this is just a deck that will outright lose to those cards, right? So make sure that if you are going to be playing a deck like Branded, that you have a game plan. The other thing, too, is if people are still going to be running Protoss as adamantly as they are, the whole idea right now is to blind call Dark. Now, you do have some light monsters in the deck to actually go ahead and play around this a little bit, but at the same time, it's going to hurt really bad when your opponent just blind calls Dark and you're like, oh, right? Like, that's not good. So make sure that you understand that's going to be in the room. If you do choose to play this, I don't recommend this, but it can be something that you do see in the room. The next one's going to be Memento. I had this at 1.5. It's probably going to be like bottom 1.5. I think this is probably one of the scariest decks in the room. And, you know, it really does suck, again, with Bestials, but I think this deck just has so much opportunity to win. Not only do people not still understand what this deck does, but I feel like if you're a really skilled pilot with this deck, it's probably one of the scariest things that you can run into. And, you know, I've always said this about rogue decks in general, is that, like, if you run into a rogue player that really understands their deck, it's going to be a very rough time. And on the flip side of that, when the deck is not in rogue, and it's something that's still pretty unpredictable, like Memento, and they really know what they're doing, it's going to be really tough. So make sure that you at least have an understanding of what Memento does. This is another one that you definitely want to go to my Where to Hand Trap and check out what it does and how to hit it, because this is going to be a deck that you will also see in the room. It will be there, and you need a game plan for this. Gem Knight, this is more so like the blind second build. I'm going to put it like middle of tier 2. I think it's okay. I don't think I'm necessarily worried about it, because you can still just like Lancia this deck or Droll this deck, and they still have a pretty awful time. Definitely Ash on things like Dispersion as well, and you'll be okay. Just for like the fusion dump from deck. There's going to be a lot of situations where you run into heavy poly and things like Lunalight, or if they even consider playing that in like Gem Knight, I'm sure they could. It's just one of those things where you kind of just want to be like, okay, like this is going to be something in the meta, that's fine, but I wouldn't necessarily be too afraid of running into this deck, because I don't think that it's going to be like super popular. I think there's going to be like 1 or 2 people on this deck for sure that'll do like a pretty deep run, but I don't really think that means that it's going to be something that you see fairly often. Another one that I think that you could see tied with Punk, this is going to be interchangeable, honestly, is going to be the Evil Twin deck. Evil Twin is really solid because of the amount of non-engine, but at the same time, the deck does suffer from a lot in the format currently, especially Droll. Bestials, But, you know, it's one of those things, too, where, like, the deck can kind of just extend through a lot. I really like playing this deck back when it was, like, brand new and we could play, like, triple cross out, because the deck just thrived off of one-to-one interactions. But with the new Link 1, every time you interact with the deck, then you just draw a card. It's kind of crazy. And then the Link 1 also being, like, right into Requiem was kind of crazy. So this is the deck that I would just, like, make sure you read up on. I wouldn't exactly be worried about playing against it, but, like, read up on it in case you do, right? It's not really going to be, like, that hard to handle, but like you want to know what it does, right? You don't want to get surprised. The next one here, bottom in tier 2, I'm gonna put them together. It's gonna be White Forest and Mermail. Y'all know how I feel about these decks. They have like some kind of tops right now, so like it's fine, but I'm not really gonna be respecting these too heavily. And I know someone's gonna complain about that, but that's fine. They're in tier 2. I don't think that they're going to be anywhere near like up here at all. I think that they are both going to do okay at the event. I think that they're going to be fine. But at the same time, I feel like these decks are going to be just amply better than these decks. I'd also rather just play Punk. And I know some people might think that I'm, like, putting that too high, but if you played against Punk and, like, you've seen the gameplay of Punk, the deck is pretty solid. The deck does a good amount right now, which I think is pretty fire. I actually enjoy seeing that in the format again. Middle of tier 2, I have the Melodious deck. We've been seeing this deck just do more and more, which is really cool. I like this deck a lot. I think that it has a lot of promise in the format, and I know a lot of people really hate when I put this one really high. But at the same point, I think Melodious is a very cheap deck right now, and I think that it's something that can go really deep into the tournament if you know what you're doing. Triple Purge, you have Triple Orange Light, you have Ostinato, which is arguably one of the most broken cards we have right now. Still in a way worse deck than other decks, but still having access to a card like that is insane. And then you've even seen in the past different variants of like Melodious Ryziel, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can do, but I think Melodious has a lot of promise into this format. Rogue, being Lab, definitely better than like Morganite, but unless you really understand what you're doing with Lab, that deck is not that good. Blue Eyes, I would put at like back of 1.5. The deck does really well, and that's something that I will respect. The deck itself is pretty powerful in what it can do. If it goes first, I've seen some pretty nasty boards. I've seen some pretty crazy play rounds. And I do think that Blue Eyes has a lot of promise into this format as well. I definitely think that the deck can do very well. I've definitely seen some people just be like, you know, like, it's whatever, you know, it's not going to be like that crazy. But after playtesting as much as I have so far for the WCQ, I really do think that Blue Eyes has a chance to do a very deep run in this event. Next one up for Rogue is going to be Regenesis. The Bisto variant is probably the best variant of this deck. I don't necessarily find it to be like that crazy. And a deck that innately locks you out of your extra deck, not my favorite, especially when you're trying to go to like an NAWCQ and like go real deep. It's just something that I think is really cool for what it is. It's a very unique deck. And I'm sure that it can catch a lot of people off guard, but I don't really think that I would play it before anything up here. I'd probably be playing like Branded before I played Regenesis, you know? So it's just one of those things where if you feel really confident with the deck, then sure, bring it, right? Like you could do really well. And I'm sure somebody could at this event as well, but it's in Rogue. The next one up here is Odeon. This is just gonna be in Rogue. I don't have any don'ts for you today because I didn't really add in any like crazy bad decks, but I do think that Odeon has some merit. I've played against the deck before quite a few times, and I've seen lately like gameplay of it as well, and it's just one of those things where like if you randomly get caught going second against this deck, it's going to be a bad time. So a lot of people are playing like the Dusters and the Lightning Storms, but like I almost feel like those aren't even enough sometimes against this deck, especially if they're on like the Fiendsmith variant too, which is usually pretty standard. The last one topped without those cards, which is really interesting. But it's one of those things where, like, if this deck gets to go first, it'll probably just win the day, right? But it's a matter of, can you win your die roll? And that's usually what Rogue decks are. Is if they win their die roll, crazy deck. If they lose die roll, raps, right? So that's where I would put those. Crystron is another one that I put in the back of 1.5. I think this deck is really scary, and it's something where if you don't know what you're doing against this deck, it can really just FDK out of nowhere. And that's something that you want to be prepared for. In your testing, you want to make sure that everything like 1.5 and above, at least, that you have a very good understanding of what these decks do. Because if you play against them and you don't, you just kind of lose. It's going to be bad. So you want to make sure that you understand what they do. Crystron is pretty solid right now, and that's something that I will give a lot of credit to. just because I feel like the deck can do really well at the NAWCQ. Now the next one, we'll just go over top of Punk. This is going to be a double deck here because there is the Heraldic variant and the Onomat variant of Ryzeal. I think they're both tier 2. I think that's really cool that you can like Ouroboros loop your opponent like real hard and then proceed to set up a board, but I don't really find either of them particularly amazing. I think that if you're going to be playing the better engine, then absolutely, just play the Ryzeal Mitsurugi variant, because that's going to be the best one. But, whether you're playing pure Heraldic or Onomat, I think that it's objectively just worse than playing the best deck in the room, which is going to end up being your Ryzeal Mitsurugi. And I know that there is going to be a lot of different changes going into this event because of the 2 sets that just dropped. But I do think that if you have X in your deck and you have Mitsurugi Ritual in your deck, you're probably going to do pretty alright. You know, those cards are very terrifying. And I've seen a lot of people running things like Delta in their side even just to stop the Ritual card. So that's something that I would definitely consider in your deck building right now is, are the cards you're playing right now better than the cards above them in this tier list? And if they're not, can you get those other cards, and are they optimal for you to learn in a good amount of time before the event? The next one here is going to be Orcus Mitsurugi. This one's also going to be just behind the Ryzeal deck in tier 2, because I feel like the deck itself has a lot of problems, but I also feel like they're mitigated by each other. Whether you get Drolled or Lancia, you still have the other side of the deck. It just is a little bit unfortunate that we don't have things like Nightmare Mermaid to really branch into Orcus cards, but I do really like the fact that you can play this deck and do really well through a lot of the really annoying hand traps they have to deal with right now. But this is arguably one of the worst decks into things like Fua. So if you see someone go like Harp War Effect and then you just hit it with a hand trap like a Fua, and then they have to go into like Link 1, then to Galatea, then they ding, you know, it's rough. It's rough. So I don't really see this deck being that great, but it's probably something that you will run into. I hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you did, definitely go ahead and leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you.